You definitely need to have a central coordinator. Listening is huge. It's not one size fits all. You could pick the right problem and you could fix it the wrong way.
My name is Jochem van der Veer. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called TheyDo, the journey management platform for business decision-making. We raised over $50 million and are growing globally. Our enterprise customers include Ford, J&J, the Home Depot, and Pfizer. I mean, wherever you look, understanding customers is key to staying ahead. But in order to do this at scale, aligning so many different teams with the customer journey is incredibly hard, but it is possible. I really wish this podcast existed before we started our company because so many companies are organizing around journeys and there's so much to learn. So in order to share what I'm learning, what I'm hearing with our community, I meet with industry experts. And in my video podcast, I'm here to explore the world of business strategy, design, and journeys, customer journeys, to really get an understanding of how leaders are changing their way in their business. So let's dive into the show. My guest today is Allison Landers. She is the CxO at UBS for banking and lending. She's also part of the renowned FinTech Top 100 Women. She's been at the forefront of CX, even though her titles weren't necessarily CX in the beginning, but she's been there for a long time, spearheading large-scale initiatives at global financial institutions like Prudential, Wells Fargo, and today at UBS. So no doubt she's a visionary leader in customer and employee experience. And we're going to talk about bridging strategy and technology and getting results from being customer-centric, not just keeping the score, which so many customer experience functions today are. So before we dig in, Allison, I am so excited to have you on. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you.
I want to start with the evolution of customer experience, maybe also in financial services, because before we were recording, we're chatting a little bit, and I asked you like, hey, you've been in the field for like over 2 decades or so. And you said like, yeah, it depends on, if you look at my titles, not so much, but actually, yes. So tell me a little bit about that and your experience of customer experience and the evolution that you've seen along those like 20 years, 20 plus years.
Yeah, so officially, I've only had experience in my title for 10 years. It came in for the first time at Prudential in 2015, where we were building capabilities, right? First for a business unit, then a division, and then the global enterprise. But it was still relatively new, especially in financial services. The way I like to describe it, though, is if you look at all the things I did from the late 90s when I started working in the technology sector forward, all of the jobs that I had were about designing and or delivering client experience. For example, marketing or communications. Obviously, those impact your clients, running channels, and or developing products. Those are all experience related functions. So when I first took the role on a Prudential, you connect the dots and say, I have been doing this for a while. I'm uniquely, positioned to connect the dots across channels, connect the dots across client segments, geographies, products, because I've held all those different individual roles.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you mentioned Prudential a few times because they are renowned for their journey management practice. I have Shaq. I don't know if you know
that up. Yes.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
So Shaq, who was with you standing that up, I'll have on the show a little bit later. So I won't spill the beans a little bit, but I guess it shaped a lot of your thinking because when we think about CX today in many organizations, it's a function. Sometimes it's a center of expertise.
Yep.
What do you believe is the best way? Like, should it be a function? Should it be a center of expertise? Is it everyone's job? Like, what should we define CX as?
Yeah, this is the $1 million question. And there's actually a joke that customer experience teams or experience teams, now we've often dropped the reference to customer because so many of the teams are responsible for both the customer and employee experience since they're so closely linked. But the joke is that the teams either own everything or they own nothing. And what I have found is there is a set of capabilities or responsibilities that all the teams seem to have. For example, journey management. And that can mean lots of different things. It might mean you facilitate the process of journey mapping, right? Or it might mean your team owns some or all of the journeys in a firm. Insights from a variety of sources, usually voice of the client, voice of the employee feedback. So in some places, it just means you own surveys. In other places, it's all sources of feedback that a firm gathers. Competitive intelligence is often part of the mix. Market research could be part of the mix. Service design, UX experience and research. Then there are the functions that are sometimes included, right? Depending on how your firm is structured or how mature the practice is. Marketing and communications may, for example, be involved. Service, and that might be service strategy or the actual owning of contact centers, right? And direct service teams, owning of digital products and platforms. So there's kind of no one set of ingredients for the teams. Those seem to be the building blocks. But I have noticed a change. The first time I had a CX role, I reported up through the chief marketing officer. And now as a CXO, I have marketing reporting up to me. I think that there has been an understanding that marketing, communications, any way of talking to your customers is, again, just another part of their total experience with your firm.
Yeah, when you think about org design, do you believe that is a better way of doing it? So putting customer experience at the top and then having these mission critical functions report into it? Or is it like context depending on the type of firm, the type of industry that you are in?
I think it depends on the type of firm and industry. But in financial services, I think historically most firms I would categorize as product-centric, right?
Yeah.
So, what reports up through the CEO or the heads of your P&Ls, your product lines. And that certainly has been the case most places I work. CX jobs are hard, right? To change the way people think and behave, so that they can do their jobs better. It's hard. And if you don't have a seat at that table with those product leads, right, then you're not going to be able to drive the change that you need to drive in an organization. And I've had responsibilities in both ways. I say it is easier when you have a seat at that senior leadership table.
Sometimes that's not available. It's not there. And experienced leaders need to get it. In some organizations, it is there. So you stood it up at Prudential.
Yes.
There was definitely not something there, but then we're talking, over 10 years ago, maybe longer, something like that?
It started 10 years ago. I was with the firm just, around 7 years. And as you mentioned, my team is still there and flourishing, winning awards for the work that we started a decade ago, because it does take time for these programs to bear fruit. But the way that we built it at Prudential was almost like a test and learn. I started in a business unit, the US based group insurance business, where we stood up the function and we had success with it. Actually, adopting journeys was one of the first kind of successful projects that we did. Looking at, for example, how we brought on new clients, how they went through the enrollment experience and opened their products with us. There was lots of room for improvement. And the success was so great that, a couple years into it, they said, gee, hey, what's working over there we think could work for your sister business, the retirement business. So then we kind of stretched the capabilities so that they were working across a business unit instead of just, one product area. And then next thing you know, a couple of years later, when that was successful, they brought it up to the top of the house. That was very different than when I moved to Wells Fargo, and customer experience teams existed in every business unit and product organization, but there was no coordination. So I was brought on there to help coordinate, right? All these groups that were doing great work, but often in their silos, right? So you think about how that shows up to clients. If you're optimizing at a product level and your client has multiple products with you, you have the credit card and you have the checking account and you receive communications on both, and it looks like they come from two different companies, right? Or how I have to interact or what I expect from this product is not how it works elsewhere, or this channel from that channel. So yes, different stages of maturity for different firms.
Yeah, so product-centric versus journey-centric is a big topic, especially in financial services, because like you said, clients have multiple products and we can't just optimize for one or another. There are so many industries where this siloism is prevalent, right? So I don't like the idea of we need to break the silos, right? I think like that has tried and tested its merits in the market, but I'm not a big fan of that. Silos are there for a reason. It makes sense for a lot of things, but it breaks down at some point. So it's more like customer experience is a forcing function almost to bring
What
the silos together.
1000%. We're horizontal, right? We work across
Yeah.
channels, we work across products, we work across business divisions, client segments, however you might be organized in a firm. And I think, yeah, it's about orchestration. And like I said, connecting the dots. I mean, pick on an experience that we just talked about, opening a product. Why would it be so different to open a credit card product than a checking account? I mean, you might have different questions, right? Or pieces of information that you need to collect from the same customer, but there should be some set of commonality until there's a reason things shouldn't be consistent, right? And so I think even just drawing attention to the fact that, hey, look, opening accounts or, doing this activity is wildly different over here than it is over there or in that channel versus this channel. And it's causing confusion for our clients, right? Or friction for our clients. So how do we get everybody that owns kind of pieces and parts of this experience around the table to understand how we show up today and figure out how to show up better in the future? Yes.
The so at Prudential, it was very journey-centric, and at Wells Fargo, it was very product-centric, but CX was embedded in the teams, and therefore coordination was a missing piece, and you brought that. Can we talk about
And
your
now they were
current
moving
or
to journeys. Wells Fargo was adopting journeys. They were just
okay,
not as far along in the process as we were at Prudential when I left Prudential.
right?
Prudential organized everything by journeys, by the time I was leaving. Again, that's not how it started. It started as one, trial run. And based on success, it just kept growing.
So when Wells Fargo is adopting it, was that for you a better blueprint, having CX embedded in the teams and moving towards a journey-centric organization using that from Prudential? And I'm also curious to understand like how your current org is structured. Now you're doing it again or
Yes.
have been
Yes.
adopting an organization that was already there. So
Yes.
well, how are you structured today? And what are some of the lessons that you took from Prudential, Wells Fargo with you to improve where
Yes.
you are?
So we are very much rallying around journeys. So I will say, having stood up the capability at Prudential, I understood how it could work. When I got back into banking, because I had been in banking for a decade prior to getting into insurance, when I got back into banking and they were adopting journeys, it made a lot of sense to me, right? And in banking, the journeys are pretty straightforward. In fact, you could Google what are what are the common banking journeys, and there are about 6 of them from account opening through account closing. So it's pretty kind of standard mantra. And then coming to UBS, where we are expanding our banking products and services, journeys have helped us design future state experiences, from scratch, which is pretty fantastic because I use journeys in 2 ways. We talked about one, you've got an existing experience. Maybe it was developed in silos or it's suboptimal, and you get everybody around a table and you get on paper, how does it work today? And you identify the friction points or, gee, I'm sending an email today and tomorrow a letter is going to tell you the exact opposite and cause you trouble. So when you get current state down on paper, then it's easy to identify where things can improve. But journeys are also great when you're building something new and you've got a blank sheet of paper and you design how things should work right? From outside in, from the client's perspective. A journey is merely that. What does it take a client, from start to finish to get something done with you? They want to make a payment. They want to open an account. They want to dispute, some type of a charge on that account. And what are the steps they have to take in whatever channel or channels that they're using, and what people do they have to interact with, and what systems are they going to, have to use? What communications are you sending them? And, what kind of has to happen below the line or behind the scenes in your organization to stand that up to clients? And the beauty of doing kind of future state journey mapping is you don't have to worry about budget and you don't have to worry about, systems constraints and whatnot. I usually do challenge the teams when they're starting from scratch to say, don't think about how it would work here based on what you have today, but if Google were building it or if Amazon were building it, how would you expect it to work? And that gets people in the right mindset, because the truth of the matter is, and I mean, you had asked earlier about what's changed in financial services since I got into it 20 years ago. When I first got into financial services, people had really low expectations, especially for their bank. They expected the experience to be rotten, and I wouldn't say they gave you a pass, right? But, they were only comparing you to other banks, right? Or other financial services firms. And again, had very low expectations. And now they're comparing you to every other interaction you're having with any other brand in any other industry, right? And they expect you to operate like Amazon and Google. And so it's best to kind of design from scratch the things that will meet those expectations. But, journeys are also helpful because sometimes when you get your current state on paper and you get your desired or future state on paper, you put them next to each other and that's your multi-year roadmap. How do I get from here to there? And sometimes, it's daunting because you got lots of technology that needs to be fixed and, things that need to be built. But you can start small. Sometimes it's literally the words on the page can be changed and you can totally improve the experience.
Right. And so that's the nuance, right? Because like you said, like you can Google all the banking journeys and you get them, and every bank has the same. So there's no differentiation anymore. Customer expectations are rising. We
Yes.
all expect like a seamless experience and everything is digital, no person or people interacting with us in between. There's no friction. So at some point, all the banks will be the same. And yet that's not the case. So
Yeah.
what do you do differently? How do you help UBS to stay ahead and to stay relevant for its clients along the
Yeah.
next decade?
That's a good challenge. And so, one differentiator is I have worked for three other banks, but they were banks first. Yes, they had wealth management divisions or private banking divisions. This is the first time I'm working for a wealth management firm that has a bank. And it is a different mindset. So, in the US, we're primarily a wealth management firm. And when you think of the experience we deliver, it's highly personal, high touch, and primarily delivered through financial advisors. And the bank was started about 20 years ago to help meet our clients' broader financial needs, right? And the desire for them to manage kind of their everyday finance all in one place with their trusted advisor. But when it comes to the banking capabilities, they do have different expectations. Banking is 24/7, right? And they want to be able to use different channels. And so while we may not be a digital first or digital only firm, we clearly have to be digitally enabled because the clients and the situations that, make sense for self-service, they have to work, right? They have to be easy. So I would say our greatest challenge is striking that right balance of how do we augment the white glove, service that our clients have come to expect from their financial advisors with digital, right? And even behind the scenes, again, thinking about experience, not just what the client sees, but what the employee sees, is how do we use technology to make the advisor's job easier, right? So that they can better service the clients. And this is important, figuring out how to kind of optimize our channel mix is important for the clients that we have today, but also for the clients we want in the future, which a lot of the times are the children and grandchildren of our current clients, right? They have different expectations, different ways of operating and interacting with firms.
Who owns the journey? And this is not a trick question. It's your relationship manager. They own the relationship, and she will be responsible for one client or multiple clients. Then the customer experience team is typically owning the end-to-end journey, making sure that all the data, all the systems are operational. And then there's the entire organization in between. So who owns the journey? Like, who should drive it? How do you think about owning it or managing it, however you want to define that? But in your terms, like, how do you define ownership so that decisions get made effectively and not necessarily are death by committee, if you will?
Yeah, I think it is a good question. It's literally one I was talking about earlier today. So, I think you definitely need to have a central coordinator, right? But there are so many different teams that play, and you know, for a customer experience team or an experience team to be successful, it's a lot about trust and relationship building, right, across a firm. And how do you asked the question specifically about, my current world. You've got to work with the financial advisor teams. You have to work with the traditional product owners. You have to work with the channel owners, the back office operations folks, the fraud teams, right? The service teams, and knit it all together, so that it does show up consistently to clients. But the CX team, the experience teams are the quarterbacks generally, because again, from where we sit, we can see across the products, the channels, right?
So that's the coordination layer, right? You see what is happening, but often, and in many CX organizations, we're seeing things that are wrong. We are understanding like the deeper needs customers have. We're seeing the clear friction points, the pain points in all of these journeys. But then what happens? We escalate. We bring that to the attention of the people that are there to make the change, and then they go and say thank you, but we have other things to do. So
you need to drive the accountability.
Right.
Again, today my team does not own all the journeys. We may facilitate the process. I said earlier, other places I've worked, my team has owned some journeys, or perhaps we own a journey until it becomes mature enough, and then you pass it off to somebody who will take it. But I would say like a move money journey, which is a pretty common banking journey, right? I want to move money by paper check, ACH, wire, Zelle, whatever method you want to use it. I mean, that sits with the product folks that own that capability. And naming them as a journey owner, drives the sense of accountability that you need, right? Where they're going to have the responsibility for ensuring things are improved.
Do you think that works, like turning a traditional product owner and say, okay, your new role is now a journey owner? Is that it? Like, does that help?
It depends. And I think that the word product means different things to different people, right? I've worked in organizations where product is traditionally, I own the checking account product, I own the P&L. Other places, it's a digital product. But you're right. I mean, the skill set to be able to look across and think about the experience is very different than owning a P&L.
Right. And in some organizations, or many organizations, there's enabling teams, right? They own some capability that is used across different products, across different parts of the business. Organizations adopt ideas like the value stream, right? Where different parts of journeys come together. I had Jivesh from Nissan on the pod, and he talks about the end-to-end experience for Nissan is basically like discover, buy, and then serve, or try, buy, and serve, right? Pretty standard, right? But then the nuance below that and the capability below that, you get into a massive beast of an org design. So if you get to redesign a top financial institution from the ground up, and you are the CXO, and you get to really do it well, like, how would you structure things if you had this magic wand and you can do it maybe for UBS or for pick a favorite brand of yours, like in your mind? Like, how would you go about it and structure the teams and the journeys or the experiences in a way that make most sense in today's world?
Um, that is a challenging question because you're stepping into a firm that has been established, and no two firms I have worked at have had the same structure.
Right.
And so to be successful, you cannot go in with the same solution, the same hammer, right? When, you've got different nails. I do think organizing by journeys is a game changer. Um, I think it is hard to take an established organization and make it snap to a journey grid or, so in the interim, as we said, you have people who are, their roles are changing, right? Or they're taking on an additional role as a journey manager or a journey owner, plus what they've done in their day job. So I don't know that there is a perfect answer, because I don't think that there are any two companies that are at the same stage of maturity and have the same org structure. So I know that that's probably not a popular answer to your question, but I think it really depends.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I would say, having now stood up um, enterprise experience functions at three large firms, is you can take the best practices with you, you can take the skill sets with you, but you have to figure out how to optimize it in the environment you join. And the three environments I've built these teams for have been wildly different. So again, you can take pieces and parts and replicate them, but you have to do it differently to be successful in all the different environments.
Yeah, I like that point of view a lot because sometimes people maybe naively think, hey, look, this journey-centric approach to business is the way forward. Okay, great. Like you said, right? It's a game changer. Okay,
Yep.
we're going to go all in and we're renaming everyone to journey manager and everything will be just fine. And here we go. But there are nuances that you have to respect. The business sometimes has been over a century old, and there's all these
Yep.
legacy systems and processes that we can't just change overnight. So let's take a different spin to this. So there's not
Okay.
one way of doing it, but there are principles and
Yes.
frameworks that you
Yes.
have in your mind when going into a new organization. And I'm sure there are commonalities between, let's say, Wells Fargo, let's say Prudential and UBS that are common that people can learn from. So I'm curious, like, are there specific patterns in the way you have gone about being more journey centric in these organizations that are common across them?
Um, Definitely. I mean, I think again, it's important to understand your industry, right? And like I said, the products and service that your industry offers, and maybe your customer segment is a little different in this organization than your competitor's organization, but at a high level, things are the same. Um, but it's an opportunity to understand how you show up today, right? And to set targets for improving that. And like I said, whether you're improving existing experiences or designing net new experiences, um, the journey approach, I think, is definitely helpful. But when I think of coming into a new firm, you got to take your 90 days at the beginning to understand how the firm is organized and who the important players are, right? And to listen. And listening is huge. When I think, or when I bubble up experience, I say you have to know your customers, you have to listen to your customers, and you have to make things easier for them. And if you can accomplish those things with your CX team or your experience team, you'll be a rock star. And it's a lot easier said than done. Um, Similarly, when people ask me what is the value of an experience team, because, a lot of experienced teams were spun up, a lot of experienced teams were given big budgets, and a lot of experienced teams have been evaporated, right? And the ones that survive and thrive, again, by knowing your customers, listening to your customers, and making things easier for them, it's a win-win for both your customers and the business, because everything my teams have done have either made money for a firm or saved money for a firm, right? And the client doesn't look at what you're doing as cost cutting. The client looks at what you're doing as enabling something for self-service or off their mobile phone, that they used to have to call into to get the information for, or fill out a paper form for. So for them, it's faster, easier, better. And, to the company, well, I saved postage and I saved printing, and, I was able to strip costs out. So if you kind of keep that approach in mind, that's kind of the consistent secret sauce. Like I said, mixed in with what are the tools in my toolbox? Well, I want to be able to make data-driven decisions. What data do I have? Right? Right. Some places do have mature analytics. They know where people fall off in processes, and other places have no clue. Right. So can you add tagging to your website? Can you see where people are getting friction? In the interim, what are people calling to complain about? Right. What might I be able to infer about a broken process from, the listening that I have? So like I said, you just kind of assess the lay of the land. You figure out what you have, what you don't have, and plug it in. And that's worked for me 3 different times in 3 wildly different firms, right? And I think that's the way to approach it. Is it's not one size fits all. It's not, my team must do these 12 things. Because you could walk into an organization where, it's being done over here and it's being done over here. And, your job is to bring it together and make it better.
If you're enjoying this conversation, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast channel and leave a review. It makes all the difference. The Experience Edge podcast is where I interview business leaders, CX pioneers, and the best designers who share their insight on creating business impact, having an edge on the customer experience. Do you want more exclusive content and behind-the-scenes access? Check out the Experience Edge podcast on YouTube and LinkedIn so you don't miss a thing. Now let's get back to the conversation. Right. And what stands out for me is that actually it's pretty straightforward and so nuanced at the same time. So it's like, listen to customers. That's where it starts, right? No doubt about that.
Yeah.
But what you also point out is you got to deliver value for the business. Whether you save money or make money, doesn't matter. You have to do it and you have to prove it. And you have to do it again, right? Proving the ROI, like that's the hot topic for everyone, right? But it starts there. But the last thing that you mentioned, which is interesting, is that everyone wants to make data-driven decisions.
Yes.
It's the first part, the data-driven, we get. But what we sometimes forget, and I'm curious what your take on that is, like, if we have the data, what is the decision that we're going to make? Like, are we completely clear on when we have the data, this is our course of action, this is what we expect? And sometimes I see we have very much our data in order, but then we still don't know exactly what decision we need to make, and therefore we make no decision.
Yes. So I will, there are a couple things you said there that I want to pick at. The first is, what data do you have to make the decisions? A lot of places the data is bias, right? For example, the squeaky wheel, gets the oil, I think is what they say, right? Where, you have, maybe in my business, it's, a financial advisor has an experience, but is it a consistent experience or issue, or is it one person's experience or issue? So that's one of the reasons why we work very hard to aggregate feedback from a variety of sources and put it into a pot. Bring all your surveys together, your app store reviews, right? Your complaints, your call reasons, whatever it is, and throw them into a pot and mix it up and say, okay, across these thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of pieces of feedback, what rises to the top as far as the most common issue. And it's not just about volume, right? There's also what's the value? Because maybe if it's with your best customers, you'd have fewer pieces of feedback about an issue, but the value of those customers and keeping them happy is more important than another group. An emotion. I mean, sometimes there are interactions that are just so emotional that you have to fix that first. So I do think you have to be careful to make sure you're making decisions based off of robust representative data. That's the first thing that I would call out, especially for firms. And I think most financial services firms would fall into this bucket today, where resources are finite. I only have so many dollars. Only have so many projects to get done this year. And if I can only pick three things, I've got to make sure it's the three things that are going to move the needle the most, right? And if you don't organize your data in an appropriate way, I'm going to pick the wrong things. But you also talked about something that I think is critically important and not everybody understands, is you could pick the right problem and you could fix it the wrong way. And so one of the things that we are very much focused on is the end-to-end design process, or, the iterative experience design process, where at every step in the process, you are checking yourself to make sure, am I on the right path? So while an idea might generate from that feedback, right, that I've analyzed, or a competitive intelligence that I've got a gap versus, such and such across the street. So I know what I need to fix and I head down a path, but I need to go back to the end users and say, does this solution that I'm designing, does it actually address your problem, right? Like, would you use it? Would you be able to find it? Would it, whatever the question is, because you could solve the problem the wrong way. And by the time you launch the fix, you gain no value, right? People are still complaining on the topic. I didn't save any money. I didn't make any money. And you're scratching your head. It's not because it wasn't the right problem. It was the wrong execution. So it's hard. And, you just have to constantly be, like I said, checking your gut and experience. This is another thing I've clearly learned. It's not about what you like or what I like. It's about what resonates most with, the masses or the end users, right? And how do you find out what resonates with them? Well, you vet it. You do UX testing, you do A/B testing, you do testing and learning. It certainly doesn't guarantee that everything you launch is going to be perfect out of the gate, but it de-risks it. And you need to make sure even after you've launched something that you continue to listen, because people will give you the feedback about, tweak this, move that button, change the word on that page, and you'll constantly improve the yield.
Are there specific checks and balances you've built in that are maybe not common for people that you think are very useful to hold yourself accountable for, am I solving the right problem the right way? Other than, of course, you need to talk, you need to validate, you need to back your claims with data and check your assumptions at every stage. But are there specific things that you've implemented that work particularly well for your teams?
Yeah, I've worked places and it sounded like a crazy request at the time. And now when you look back, you say, oh my goodness, that's like the minimum, right? But to be able to make a statement that you will test an experience at least once with the end users before it goes live, right? Ideally you're testing it multiple times along the way. But if you haven't been testing at all, or you haven't been testing consistently, that's a really big step forward. I think the other thing to call out is with the end users, right? I mean, so many times you step in and they say, oh, we piloted it. Well, who did you pilot it with? Well, we piloted it with the team that designed it. That, we all know how we feel about our own cooking or whatnot. You need to pilot it with the end users or the customers or the people who look like your customers that are not close to this, right? To be able to understand, are they going to be able to get through this process when, they don't know where to find the button because they didn't design the button. So I think that that's really important too. And one of the tools that I've done is, research panels. Like you need to literally at a split second be able to go grab a representative sample of your end users. If you're fixing an employee experience, then it's your employees. If you're fixing a client experience, it's your clients. But a representative sample of the people pretty much real time to be able to vet something with, whether it's user experience testing, a one-on-one conversation, a quick survey. And so having, the people at the ready to answer your questions all the time is like a superpower, because I go back to, again, when I was first, working, and if you had a research question, you had a 6-week process to set up a focus group where you brought, 6 people who weren't representative of your client base into a room and you asked them questions. And once they were out the door and you'd wasted 60,000 American dollars, right? You were kind of done with your testing and you hoped the path you were on was the right path. So it's, that always on real time iterative feedback. I think that's what makes a difference.
I love that. Do you have, let's say I'm in a tech company, right? The way we roll out things is we first have a very specific group of internal people trying things out, getting a feel for it. Then we roll it out to an initial set of customers that have asked for this or have specific needs around this, and we get it in their hands and give it to them, but we guide them. And when that starts to work, we bring it to a more broader beta group where in general, like a bunch of customers are sitting in. And when that is great, then we start to roll it out to more people. And ultimately, it's going to be available for everyone. Do you have similar trajectories, or is it different that you are relying way more on like these panels and people coming in real time specifically?
We do both. And again, I would say since our business is B2B2C, right, we generally have advisors who are selling our products and services or recommending our products and services to their clients. It is critical that they see, feel, touch the experiences that we deliver, because if they perceive that it's not going to be good enough for their clients or their clients won't be able to get through it, they won't recommend it. Right. So, we do a lot of piloting to make sure that folks are comfortable. But the panels, I have panels of advisors, I have panels of other team associates, panels of the end clients. And again, it's everybody can always continue to mature, but these are the tools in the toolbox, right? That when you walk in and say, if I need to be able to test frequently and test real time, what do I need? Okay, I got to stand up panels, right? Or like you said, have this kind of waterfall approach. Waterfall's a bad word these days, but a ramp
Tie it
up
back to the
approach,
journey and let's call it out.
a ramp up approach to go from, kind of a small and safe to all clients. And there have been places that I've worked that didn't have a ramp up. I mean, I won't name names, but there was one place, that I worked at, a very successful firm, that they just launched stuff. Now, what they launched, again, was based on insights. We have this opportunity. We're going to fix it. But they didn't really test it along the way. They would just go build something and, kind of cross their fingers that that was the right solution. They would launch it. And we all know that change is hard for people, right? And oftentimes, even if what you are launching is an improvement, and an improvement people have been begging you for, you're changing something on them. The login page has changed. They don't know where to find this thing or that thing. And sometimes, you said this earlier, I forget exactly how you phrased it, like you're chasing a number, right? Like, oh no, if my online survey score goes down, then this must mean it's a negative and we have to back that new capability out. And they would do that. And it was actually really frustrating, because if they would actually just kind of stay the course, people would get used to the change, and then they would see that the change was actually a positive. Or you would say, well, why is my change failing? Maybe I didn't do a very good job of telling customers change was coming, right? Maybe if I had warned them that the login page was changing, or the button was moving, or we were increasing the requirements around their password for their own safety, then they would be better prepared. And we wouldn't see that kind of dip before you saw the return. So it is really important. Like I said, you can't promise that nothing will go bump, but you can certainly lower the risk.
Right. When we think about journey management at large and zooming out a little bit, what do you think people get wrong about this journey-centric transformation work that you've been so good at? Like, what are some things where people are not really getting it or misunderstanding the potential or the impact of the implementation?
I think it's hard. I mean, we've talked about how you have to get so many different partner groups around the table, especially if you're in a larger organization. And it's hard. It's hard to get all those people into a room. It's hard to protect the time, you know. And I would also say culturally, in some places, they don't want to admit that the current state is what the current state is, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes they just don't know, but other times they're saying, no, 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 it doesn't work like that. And if you can't get the honest current state on paper, it's just your starting point, right? There should be no judgment, no consequences for being honest about, okay, we send this letter. It's really confusing. It makes people call, right? If you can't get that down on paper, then you can't fix it. So I think that's a big challenge. It is kind of a cross-functional effort. You got to get all the right players in the room. It takes time, and you got to stay focused because there were times when we had stops and starts with journeys, and and you just kind of got to keep people focused and plow through it. And if they can get to the other side and see the value, then they want to do it again.
I like that point, and to do it again. So the way I think about it, especially in a large enterprise organization, when you start this, it's like daunting, right? It's all encompassing. It's so big and so large. And sometimes we forget it doesn't have to be so large and all encompassing. You can start in pockets of the organization. You can have small wins. You can build it out from there. Customer centricity, like in general, is maybe even unachievable across everything in the
Oh
company.
yeah, yes, I would say you have to pick a starting point. I mean, again, going back to, becoming a customer, whatever you want to call the journey, it varies by industry, right? In banking, it's open an account, and insurance, it's, enroll. But it's essentially, how do people apply for your product, get approved for your product, acquire your product if you're buying a Nissan, right? That's a long end-to-end journey. I mean, when you're buying life insurance, sometimes you have to give blood work, right? Like it can span a long time. So you don't necessarily start with the whole thing, start to finish, or you do a super high level journey and you identify the friction point is proving that you're, eligible for this insurance. And you go in on something kind of bite-sized and manageable, right? With a smaller group of people, and you map that out and you show, okay, here's how it works today. Now we understand why it's so painful. Let's improve it. It builds that momentum, right? It builds the momentum, first of all, with your internal partners, like, okay, we can take bite-sized pieces and we can make things better. But it also starts to signal to your clients, they're changing things, right? Things are getting better. So the whole website didn't change, but this area on it changed, or one capability changed. So that's helpful too, is to build that momentum by proving value in more digestible increments.
How do you think about proving value or proving the return on investment of these steps, programs, however big you want to make it? Because I think this is the hard part for a lot of customer experience organizations that are part of that, like, we keep the score mentality, right? We're looking backwards on our NPS or on our CSAT, and we're doing more surveys, or we're tweaking the
Yeah.
group of respondents so that we get a little bit of an uptick there, and we can be celebrating that. And let's not be judgmental about whether that's bad or crap or we should do something about it. But how do we get them to actually create business value? And how do we get the language, and how do we do that in practice? Like, it
Yeah.
sounds so simple, right? Oh yeah, of course. Like, here's the money we made or the cost we saved. But how do we get out of our backward looking bubble and start to really have business impact? while having this customer-centric focus.
Yeah, and chasing a number is a challenge. I've worked at places where they wanted you to chase Net Promoter Score, chase
Yeah.
JD Power, chase whatever. And I very much don't believe that there's any one metric in a vacuum that like is everything. And in fact, I've had better luck with improving Net Promoter Score by making things easier for clients. I've proven at multiple places I've worked that if you can remove friction and make things easier, people are more likely to recommend you, right? Getting back to that, know your customers, listen to your customers, make things easier for them. So I think that that's important. But I think I'm thinking back to the account opening experience at Wells Fargo, right? And I had the market research team at Wells Fargo, and yes, surveys were a source of lots of information, but we had journey surveys for the account opening process. And we measured the experience for account opening for, I think, 19 different products. So I knew how you felt about opening a checking account, opening a credit card, applying for, an auto loan. And we measured it by channel. So I knew how you felt about doing that over the phone or, on your phone or via the website. And you could look across this ecosystem. Again, the ecosystem had been built in silos, and you could identify best practices. Like, why is it easier, in the digital channel to open this type of a product versus that type of a product? What are they doing? And what can I take from that experience and go tell the other 18 product owners to infuse in their experience, right? Or, there's one consistent friction point across all these 19 products. It doesn't matter what you're buying, right? This is always a problem area for us. So that helps. And that's kind of, like I said, the horizontal view that experienced teams have across the silos of large organizations is we can identify the opportunities, bring the groups together, build once, deploy in multiple places type of a thing. And that really amplifies or accelerates the business value, right?
Yes.
Because otherwise, you're going to have 19 separate projects to improve this one problem that is common across 19 different areas, and they just don't know.
That's another common thing, and maybe like answering a question that is top of mind right now when CX organizations seeing the different problems, the friction points, the commonalities between these experiences that should be the same or should not be the same. Okay, great. And then we go to, let's say, in this case, the product organization, talk to the product leaders like, hey, let's do this. And then they say, yes, thank you, but no, not now. And we'll do it later. But what you just said was also true. There might be already initiatives in 4 of those teams, in 5 of those teams addressing it. So let's do one initiative and spend the rest of our time on other things, like quantifying that, like in terms of like cost saved, because you free up people to do other important work. That's a great way of creating impact without knowing the financial result of that, right? You could say like, hey, look, in the end, it will be easier for people to open accounts so we get more customers, but it's typically harder to prove, especially for, let's say, a customer experience team that starts to work across these different silos, across these different business units. So I think that's a great example. What are other ways that from that insight of like, here's the common friction, or here's a specific thing we should address, how do you turn that into actual value for the business? Do you have a way to help teams articulate that, set that up, or communicate it to people who don't understand what a journey is or necessarily believe experience is the only answer to their problems?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about how if you pull all of your insights into a pot, right, and you stir them up, and maybe there are 1,000 opportunities there that you can kind of force rank, you're almost doing that homework up front. So the reason a project rises to the top is because it impacts more clients, or you know what I'm saying, or it has a higher dollar value, or it's more of a make or break experience. So you've kind of got your business case at the ready, again, I've got some examples. Some of them seem so silly now because the technology that was new, when we launched the capability versus, today it's kind of old technology. I think about when mobile was new. And, I was running in the call centers for a bank, and literally the number one call into the call center is, what's my balance? And that's not a really great call for the call center. I mean, it's $6 for a person to answer, the phone by the time they get to you and answer your question. But it's not like, why is somebody calling to ask their balance? Because they're probably going to walk into a store and they're going to tap their phone these days or swipe their card, and they want to know, can I buy the groceries, or am I not going to be able to afford the groceries, right? They don't want to know their balance because they're thinking about buying a yacht. Right. So as the person answering that phone, that's not really a phone call where I can say, would you like a mortgage with that? Right. There's no upsell, cross sell opportunity. So, and from the client's perspective, I wait on hold for X minutes. You ask me 6 questions to validate I am who I am. Right. I ask you what my balance is. So, we launched the ability, and we already had online banking. So people could have logged in, they could have gone to an ATM to get the same information, but they were still calling, right? We set up the ability for them to text at any time of day or night. I could text BAL and get the balance on all of my accounts and make a decision about how I want to behave, right? That was a penny. The text message back and forth to us was a penny, a fraction of a penny. Right. So we saved $5.99 by avoiding every call into the call center by offering, the client this ability to text for the same information, which gave them what they wanted real time from wherever they were. The client didn't think that, we were being cheap with them. The client was thrilled, and we saved $5.99 times, X number of calls, freeing up, those resources to have more meaningful conversations. Right.
I like the analogy of the pot that we're stirring. And I think this is so key. Today with AI, everything is transcribed, everything is available and accessible. So
yes,
the contact center, getting all these low value calls is a gold mine, right? That's like the input in your pot. And typically what happens is they know these are issues, but no one is listening to them. So they ignore it and they just,
right? Because
oh,
the phone's ringing.
right.
And they've got people on hold. And I love that you brought up AI, because that is, in my opinion, another game changer. Again, these interactions, these sources of feedback, to your point, anything that can be transcribed, a call can be transcribed, a typed up survey response can be transcribed, right? An app store review can be transcribed. There are engines, they don't care where the text comes from. Just put the text through the blender, right? Apply my taxonomy and spit it out the other side. I mean, we've done proofs of concept, where you start a program and it's a proof of concept. So you do it manually. My team reads thousands of comments and we bucket them into common themes, and it takes a long time. Or you could take the same, thousands of comments, put them through an AI tool, and in under 3 hours, replicate, better, faster, smarter, what the team took 3 weeks to do. And that is the scalability, right? And then you go knock on the door of the other business division and say, gee, hey, why don't you put your data into the same pot and see what comes out the other side? So,
Right.
yeah.
So like you're preaching to the choir here, and I think our listeners will really appreciate this, because that is step one. But then at the end of the stirring of the pot, you will have a lovely drink of insight, right? Like a prioritized
1000%.
brew. That's great. But then the journey comes in, and this is, I think, where the real innovation is going in this space, where let's combine that with context, because not all insights are created equal, right? Not all sources of feedback should be taken account in the same way. So there is a scoring, there's a weighing. And then there's also the type of feedback, right? Was it an anecdote that was passed on through a call and we got the verbatim, versus like, no, we did actual customer research and it was the main topic where they had big frustration, different weight. So that's one part. But in the journey context of like, I'm opening a bank account at UBS for the first time, I have no relationship with you, versus I'm the grandchild of one of your larger wealth management clients, that context is so important. And if we don't bring that in, then we are likely to still focus on the wrong thing or a too generic thing. So I think like blending that with AI, using the journey approach, is where the innovation actually is going.
Yeah, and we also do bring into our journeys whatever behavioral data or insights we have from other sources, right? Like I said, if you are lucky enough to have funnel metrics to put on top of your journey, that at step 3, you go from 100% of the people being there to 52% of the people. Well, that tells me that's a spot I need to look more closely into, right? Why is everybody falling out? Or why are they falling out more of the mobile experience, but they stick to the web experience? Why aren't the experiences the same? Right? Like, so that's really important. Or often we'll take the voice of the client, voice of the employee feedback, and I'll take a quote from a client because I couldn't say it any better to say what they think about a certain step in the process, right? Or you could say, label this step in the process and say, this is the number 3 driver, out of all of our feedback. Again, it just helps make sure you're prioritizing the right thing.
Do you also, like, just curious, do you also bring in the performance side of the data into the journey so that you also take the measured performance, not necessarily behavioral data of people in the funnel, but actually like the business performance into account?
You mean like how many accounts did we actually sell or how many dollars were added to the accounts? Is
Yeah,
that what you mean by
if
performance data?
that's a metric, right? It's way more nuanced, and you have way more different metrics for different experiences, different journeys. But like bringing literally like the inside data from your feedback, from your interviews, from your calls, and then you have the behavioral analytics from your funnels, but then also the business performance, typically coming from the data warehouse, but really like the metrics that you should be caring about as a business in this particular journey. Do you also blend that all in together?
We're getting there. I mean, again, obviously and we have at UBS, we've been using more of the journeys to design the new experiences because we're rounding out our product set and our experiences. So we don't have necessarily the business metrics yet because we're building the journeys. But we are getting, deeper into leveraging journeys to improve existing experiences. And yes, I mean, we can look at a journey and say what percentage of the journey today is performed online. I mean, kind of similar to the example I gave from 15 plus years ago, online at X price versus offline at Y price, right? If we're able to shift that mix, and get 5% more to be self-service, and then yeah, it drives the business metrics. So we're getting there.
Right. And then all of a sudden you have a completely different discussion, right? Because then everyone can speak journey, not just the professionals, but
Yeah.
also everyone else in the business like understands what it is. So I want to end there a little bit, if I can pick your brain on this. Not everyone understands what a journey is. There are technical documents sometimes. They are structured in a particular way that you need to understand how to read this. But if you are synthesizing the information, summarizing it, and bringing a more data forward look on the journeys, I've seen organizations get wider and more broad adoption of journey centricity. So literally thinking about the structure of a journey, right? Phases, steps, lanes, like the content, the data in there. What is your take on this? Like, should more people take interest in journeys, or should we as a practice take more interest in translating it into something that the business already understands?
I think journeys are a great tool. I think they are a rallying cry and a starting point. I think where you need to be careful is trying to put too many things into a journey and try to make one simple-ish document, good for every use case around the firm. And again, the way that I think of journeys is, it's from a customer's viewpoint. What does a customer need to do end-to-end omni-channel, right, to accomplish something with you? What steps do they need to take? And you design the happy path. If everything works out perfectly, what does that look like? And you need to think about the not so happy path. If, this fails or I don't have that piece of information, how do I get back onto the happy path? We do try very hard to make them channel agnostic or product agnostic out of the gate. Because again, when I'm designing things new, I should be thinking about consistent or connected experiences unless there's a reason for them not to be. But like I said, it's from the client's perspective, the steps in a process. What people am I interacting with? What systems am I interacting with? What are you communicating to me? And we do draw a line, literally draw a line. And then below the line is what the employees or the company systems need to do to make that magic happen for the client. But those are not business requirements, technical business requirements, right? And, so journeys are a starting point. We often hand them off to our operations partners who then create really detailed workflows of what needs to happen, behind the scenes, or it might be a service blueprint for more detailed service interaction. Our UX design team goes and mocks up screens based on our journeys, and a kind of eventually it becomes the detailed business requirements. So I do want to we do try to be careful that it's not too many things to too many people, because then it doesn't have that effect that you want, which is sit down and think like the customer, right? That's what we're trying to do is make sure that people are thinking of the customer and how we show up to the customer, right? And we have a slew of experienced tenants, like, don't ask the client for information that they know you already have access to, right? Honor their channels of choice, and, kind of in combination, it's a great North Star of where we want to go.
And on that note, Allison, I want to thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. If people want to know more about how you are supposed to do this or learn from you, what is the best place they can find you and reach out if they are allowed to do that?
They're welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest place.
All right. I'll put that in the show notes. And with that, I want to thank you for being with me today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, and that's it. Thank you so much for listening. If you found it valuable today, don't forget to subscribe to The Experience Edge on your favorite podcast channel, leave a review, and share it with your team. I'd be delighted. Today's episode was brought to you by Daydo, the AI journey management solution for enterprise. To have an edge on your business strategy and to know why your customers do what they do, visit daydo.com and explore more resources to accelerate your customer experience game. And remember, the journey to creating customer-centric impact never ends, and here's always a new edge to discover in doing things differently. Next week, new episode. Until then, pushing the edge, stay inspired. See you in the next episode.